Glory have brought before. I really don't think there's anything in particular that he was afraid of it being targeted with. Maybe he just believes finally at this point, he experimented with it last week with the most recent nerf to Guardian Animals, but now just doesn't think it's quite strong enough despite swearing by it for weeks on end.
And it's super interesting to see how the bans shook out because when Glory was faced
Hmm.
up against Bankyugi's lineup, he banned away the Druid. For Surrender, he's banning the Tempo Mage, which I feel like this is the first Tempo Mage ban we've seen in all of APAC, whereas it's always been a strong deck, but it's never had, matchups in the 60s or 70%. So most people don't justify banning it away. But
You
Surrender could
have
just be
much
thinking
to
like,
answer
well, there's no
for.
warrior here. I might just ban the deck that I feel is strongest in my own lineup, which is
Yeah.
huge.
Exactly, yeah. I think it comes back to a couple of things. Like, banning the Druid is obviously good if you're afraid of your Demon Hunter not getting a win, but it's bad because your Rogue is pretty good against the Druid. I think you could argue that Mage is pretty good against Druid now, especially with the most recent nerfs here. So, honestly, I would hear out the argument for both Glory and Surrender's ban. I think it's very, very close. But this is right up in your face as the first game, the downside of Surrender's strategy is having to play out this matchup.
And against a full keep from Bankyugi as well.
Mm.
Surrender's hand is no slouch though. I say this looks like a decent full keep to me. Against Druid, I think you can't underestimate the power of Blade Dance. You do have to expect that at some point they're gonna get the GA down. And a lot of the matchup hinges on whether or not the Demon Hunter can immediately answer the two beasts that they get. For Bankyugi, I was gonna say Wild Growth into 5 mana with Lightning Bloom is 1 mana short of being able to turbo out Guardian Animals, but now he just has Innervate too.
Yep, it really couldn't be much cleaner if you'd tried. The only thing that I imagine will keep Surrender in this game is actually the Blade Dance pretty specifically. Obviously, getting up to 6 attack in order to take out the Threshers is where things get a little bit more difficult. But Teacher's Pet / Twilight Runner both can die pretty easily to the Blade Dance.
Yeah, the key from Surrender says that he will have Marrow Slicer equipped before the fact of Blade Dance, so just hoping that by the time the GA comes down, he'll have a different attack. Very likely to have so many in the deck.
And so because we're looking at very possibly the Coin Marrow Slicer, do you think this is ever Tempo Panthara on this turn? If we are talking about that line of setting up the Marrow Slicer preemptively into Blade Dance.
I don't actually think he's thinking of Coin Marrow Slicer, because from Surrender's perspective, the most likely outcome is probably pass this turn from Bankyugi into Overgrowth. So he still has one more turn, I think.
Okay.
Against specifically Wild Growth into GA the next turn, this is obviously punished, but I think it's more reasonable to think that they would have Overgrowth because it's 2 of in the deck and Wild Growth is just a 1 copy.
And adapt. He doesn't have to commit to this game plan 100% after he's seen the Wild Growth and he knows that there were 2 other cards kept in the starting hand. Very possibly he thinks that that's Overgrowth plus Guardian Animals. Maybe thinks it's Overgrowth plus Ysera, for example, instead of Guardian Animals. But I wouldn't be too surprised to see Coin Marrow Slicer here as a response instead.
Really? I was going to say it's probably still Panthera. Because even if they have Lightning Bloom, it's like 1 Innervate away. And plus, if he coined Marrow Slicers, he didn't have attack buff to go up to 6 attack either. It was just the hero power with Blade Dance.
I think you're right. I do think you're right. The fact that it has to be exactly Innervate off of one of 4 cards as well does make it very unlikely. It is going to be the punish, though, right now, as Surrender is hit with the Guardian Animals with no preemptive measures made whatsoever to clear off this board.
With Inubisoth to boot, it's just the dream for Bankyugi.
Yikes.
I would rather preserve health on the Thresher, I believe. As soon as the Twilight Runner is exposed, I think it's likely to die to either Shard Shatter or Blade Dance, so I didn't quite like this trade. I wanted to see the Twilight Runner on Panthera and then Thresher at 5 health. Still very strong though.
Yeah, I think it gets really close because even then, if Shard Shatter does come down here, it means that your Thresher is still surviving as it currently stands with just a hero power, and it means like Twin Slice plus Glaive Bound. I agree, it probably does work out slightly better if you trade the other way. With
It's
the
a small
average
thing.
breakpoints.
It's like
It's
Soul
small.
Shear, Shard Shatter are all breakpoints of 3.
Yeah.
So, but for Surrender, you're right. Just the Shard Shatter is very awkward here. It feels like he has to go for it to deplete Bankyugi's card draw a little bit, and he will have the Marrow Slicer Coin Blade Dance next turn. But it feels bad to be floating this mana.
It feels bad, but it's not going to feel great for Bankyugi either, as the Overload completely destroys his turn here. He's got strong follow-up, make no doubt, with Overflow, Kael'thas, another Guardian Animals, plus Survival to tie it all together. But it gives Surrender the time he needs to try and wrestle this one back. He needed a dead turn here from Bankyugi.
And this Anubisoth doesn't feel like a great Marrow Slicer target, so I'm okay with Eldraki and the Wand Maker here instead. For the big clear, if he needs it next turn, he still has potentially Soul Shard, Coin, Blade Dance. With the Eldraki equipped, it goes up to 7 attack.
Demons.
Do you not like just Soul Shard Lapidary on this turn, just to get a 5/5 in play?
It really weakens the Blade Dance potential, but I would hear the argument that for sure, because the minion on board can potentially give you answers to a singular minion from Bankyugi.
Right. And like, in the expected play of a beast, because he only had 4 mana last turn, so he wouldn't have played any beasts in his hand, or Overflow. Just being able to go Marrow Slicer on the following turn, set up for Blade Dance plus Skull.
Interesting. He's actually going Consume Magic and then allowing the Slicer to hit face instead. So this sets up for the biggest Blade Dance possible with Lapidary, Coin, Blade Dance the next turn.
True.
Or possibly Coin Militia, because he's now played the Marrow Slicer. There's just tons of fragments in the deck.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good if there is no strong active development from Bankyugi, which we can see there was not on this turn. There's nothing, it's just going to be an overdraw on the following turn. Free reign for Surrender to do as he pleases.
3 fragments. I guess Militia Trade ends you up with 2 3/3s and a 5/5. That's still pretty good.
It's not bad, yeah.
But he can delay and just equip the second Slicer.
Plus Wand Maker. I guess you want to fit in the hero power. Oh, it's close, isn't it? It's really
It's
close.
super close. With Demon Hunter, you always want to have weapon attack preloaded for Blade Dance in the near future. So I'm seeing the re-equip Marrow Slicer as something that covers both his bases. If Bankyugi pushes onto the board, he responds with Blade Dance, and if he doesn't, he has Militia.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the turn should be here, but I'm leaning further and further towards it not being Militia, basically, is the kind of the half of the turn that I'm okay with deviating away from.
I like this from Surrender. He does re-equip the Marrow Slicer. I think the only question was whether it was hero power or want to go with this. And given that Bankyugi most likely doesn't put more than 2 minions on the board at once with the other GA, he can still catch the Anubisoth in the Blade Dance.
A surprisingly awkward turn, though, now for Bankyugi. That Innovate would have been fantastic to have with the Kael'thas, because he currently cannot get the activation. Guardian Animals only gets him a Thresher, I believe, is the final remaining minion beast in his deck. It's really not as nice as you'd like it to be.
That's correct. I think the hand is more of a Ysera play instead.
Right. Maybe
It
just
looks
throw
like
down
he was
Teacher's
maybe
Pet.
fishing for something to pair with the Gidra, but didn't really get a good option.
Yeah, Starfall was... Or Starfire, sorry, was one off. Interesting.
Okay, that's a way to spend your mana this turn.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I like the idea of going Beast at the end there. The one thing I'm not so sure on is going for the second Nature Studies there, because that could pair pretty nicely with Kael'thas on the following turn, whereas I was just quite happy going with Teacher's Pet or the Twilight Runner on that turn instead.
That's a good point. The Twilight Runner this turn makes Ysera the next turn a little bit more enticing. And to be fair to Bankyugi, he's built a board where Surrender doesn't want to Blade Dance this because it's so small. But at the same time, if he doesn't Blade Dance, the Twilight Runner sticks and he potentially goes very wide. I think this is the Militia turn though. 5 fragments in the deck. I'd be happy to let my opponent draw 2 if I can develop super wide on the board in exchange.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of annoying how it works with the Spirit Jailer in that it takes up a slot as it gives you the 1 more soul fragment you need for the full board. So probably just straight up Militia on this turn if he's not going for the Blade Dance clear, which I think is probably not quite.
Also annoying how the Spirit Jailer itself is locking the philosophy outside of Outcast position. But small things at the moment because Surrender has pulled super far ahead. I think he can he can face tank this, right?
Yeah.
Every minion on board represents just 1 less attack than the Marrow Slicer itself.
No brooms yet found for Bankyugi, which would be absolutely crucial here if he had done so. Instead, gonna having to be tanking quite a lot of damage on this following turn. Very possibly just dying, right?
Yep, we're looking already for well, the taunt on the Ysera. Pseudo Iron Bark is a very big deal, but he's definitely just looking for dragons to get him back in the game. Doesn't hit any dragons, and now he's up to 10 cards, so any portals off the top next turn will be overdrawn.
And even now for Surrender, I think you're very happily going to take this Blade Dance just on 1 minion, because this is 9 damage, right? He could even just go Coin plus the Soul Shear as well for even more damage to try and take it out.
Yeah, it's... Ideally, you want to preserve all of your 3/3s, so if you go Lapidary, Hero Power, Blade Dance, the Ysera still has 4 HP, and then you would have to trade either your weapon attack or the 3/3. So the Hero Power doesn't do much. It might be instead Blade Dance, Coin, Soul Shear.
Right, that's what I was looking at, yeah.
And then you trade 1 3/3 instead of 2, and then the rest of the damage goes.
Yeah, seems pretty clean to me. Like, Coin with Skull is obviously nice, especially as you are definitely expecting to draw a lot of soul fragments, so mana is not going to be a thing you have all too much of available in the next few turns. But still just seems worth it for all the damage to go face here, because this is his game plan right now. The big Militia is plan A in this miserable matchup.
Very rare. Oh, did Surrender not finish the attacks? He looks super stressed there. Uh-oh.
I think he missed the 9.
He missed the 9?
Oh no, okay.
No, he missed 6. Still a big deal.
It's a very big deal at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, needed to be happening a lot quicker there, honestly, from Surrender. I mean, you know, not wanting to beat up on him too much, but this is the one thing where things can go wrong for Surrender. Is the strongest technical player I believe we have here in Asia Pacific. As long as he's getting the actions in, he will be winning the game. But now is potentially where things go wrong. A window has been opened for Bankyugi to try and pull back into this game with some insane dragon portals.
15 damage of healing, 15 points of healing as well. Maligos?
Okay.
Not that many portals.
12, 17. Not there yet.
I hate to say it, but if he hit the 6, this was guaranteed lethal.
Yep. And Surrender knows it better than anyone here. Has to try and piece this together now, because he's now up to 19, 21, 22 points of damage on this very turn.
I think it has to be Skull, because if you go Chaos Strike Eldrazi, it's not super high odds to hit.
Oh.
Okay.
That's 17, 19.
Plus 9? That's lethal, right?
It's plus
8,
it's
right?
Because he can't fit in the hero
one
power.
mana off, I think.
1 mana off lethal.
Oh no!
What a way for Surrender to not have found the win here. It's a terrible matchup. This is the worst matchup for Demon Hunter. He found the avenue to victory, but it was just the lack of time.
But you can still just push everything face, right? Maybe hold the Glaive Bound to go through Taunt. And you never die from this spot, I believe, because they're not running any spells that go face to...
It's double survival though, right? That you're afraid of.
Oh, true. With Gale Toss.
Yeah.
But then, how many cheat spells are even left for Bankyugi?
That's another question entirely.
Yeah. He'd seen double Innervate, double Lightning Bloom. It's just... but there was still one nature study spell left unaccounted for. It was too much to
You never know,
calculate
right?
with the amount of time he had. Anyway, he still pushes a ton of damage and gets rid of the Kael'thas out. So... Thresher feels like it has to happen this turn.
Thresher, Broomstick, you can trade the Poisonous in. Like, you're not clearing everything, but with Ghidra, can you ever get there?
No cheap spells, I think.
Yeah. Like, Ghidra plus Runic Carvings, is that better? After you trade the Poisonous in? It gives you a full
so
clear,
you get
right?
4 rushers, and they each... So they kill 2 minions. Yeah, it's a full clear. Ghidra with the Runic Cribbings. But the Malygos has to go in too.
Indeed.
And while I think Bankyugi definitely needed to get rid of as much damage... Sorry. With the Wind Fury, the full clear. Well, I think he definitely needed to get rid of all of the damage to give himself the best chance of surviving. It's very unlikely that he wins with this line in the long run either, because Surrender either clears the Ghidra or just has lethal anyway.
Correct, but I think the main thing is just that Surrender got himself in such a good spot with the Militia setup, not going for it too early, saving it for when it was absolutely necessary, and even obviously with the big blip in the middle. I still think if we look aside from that as a technical misplay, it was a very, very solid game from Surrender, an extremely deep understanding of the matchup in how you're wanting to approach things, even as early as the mulligan. Like, if you were a beginning player with Demon Hunter, I don't think that there is a chance you would hold on to Blade Dance, a purely reactive card in the mulligan there. And even though it didn't end up being quite as impactful in the early game as he would have liked because of the how early the Guardian Animals came down, I still think it was a very, very heads-up decision that demonstrates deep understanding of the deck.
Yep, I'm just worried though for Surrender because, this is the first time we've seen a strict technical error with the amount of time he's left for himself to manage at the end there. When we saw him play Kirin Tormage, it felt like just a misclick, which can happen here and there. This one was for real, no one's fault but Surrender's at the end there. It was tough to spot the optimization, I suppose, between Soul Shear and Hero Power, but we've come to expect so much of Surrender that this is very shocking.
Very, very not what you'd expect, indeed. I mean, he's not the quickest player in the world in terms of taking his turns. Like, he very often does spend his whole turn thinking, which obviously leads to these very, very strong games that we've come to expect from Surrender. This is the one weakness that I think he can fall into. Like, we've seen a misclick from him. We've seen obviously a roping out there. The one thing we've still yet to see from him is like just a straight up wrong decision rather than a technical misplay happening from not being able to finish his turn correctly. But nicely done. Huge win there on the Demon Hunter, given that that was not looking like the best deck. It's very weak against Druid. It's okay against Priest, not the best matchup in my opinion. And now Surrender can look to the slightly more standard decks, I suppose, of the Mage and the Rogue. And all of a sudden, I honestly think Bankyugi's Druid is somewhat targetable. Like, it can still do Druid things with just getting out a Guardian Animals nice and early, as we saw. But it's much less consistent and feels that little bit less game-winning now as well.
Definitely does. I mean, we saw the perfect opener for Bankyugi GA on turn 4 up against Surrender, which is, even earlier than you would normally see it from like Druid pre-nerf that wanted to go Overgrowth into GA. And it really seemed like it had to be that perfect mulligan from Surrender plus the early Militia. If it was lacking either of those pieces, I think the Druid would have gotten the win in the long run there. But it's a big reason, or it's a big indicator, the fact that Surrender is not bringing Druid himself to maybe Druid being a little bit too slow for the current meta. We'll see.
We shall see, indeed. I think it's definitely the kind of deck that is worth looking at going for a ban, as we saw from Glory. But I think Surrender, as he's clearly demonstrated by not going to by not bringing Druid, demonstrates that he thinks it's not an especially powerful deck at the moment. And getting the win there, even with the Demon Hunter, is a very good understanding of the deck indeed. As for the remaining decks, I think for Bankyugi, the Priest is still in a reasonable spot here up against the Mage and the Rogue, kind of hovering around the 50% mark either way with either of these decks. But it's going to definitely be coming down to the play. I think that from Bankyugi already today with his choice of the Rogues and the Priest as well, there have been many, many decision points that could have been improved on, but a lot of things that have gone very well that have decided the games. We're going to go to a very short break now while we get our players set up for the next game. But when we come back very, very shortly, we're going to have the rest of our winners bracket match to find out who's going through to the semifinals on Sunday. We'll be right back. Apologies for the break. We are ready to go with our next match in the series here. It is for the spot in the semi-finals on Sunday. We are today and tomorrow trying to find our 4 players, obviously, as it is a semi-finals, to go through to Sunday. The winner of that will be our representative from Asia Pacific, our champion, to try and fight for the cause and have ourselves an APAC champion this year. We can dream, Gia, at the very least. And with Surrender up to 1-0, it could very possibly be, if he takes down Bankyugi here, a back-to-back 2 years in a row representation for our Lord and Savior Surrender.
Glad you bring it up, Derek, because during the break, our producer Kyle actually asked me how many times has Surrender been to Worlds, and I incorrectly answered 3 at first. The answer is 2 if you count last year's Global Finals and 2017, but maybe it's 3, and I'm just a fortune teller. It depends on how Surrender does this weekend. And to move on with the series, Bankyugi has queued up the star deck of the weekend, Highlander Rogue.
Indeed, and he's presented with a Zephrys in the starting hand, obviously 100% a keep 100% of the time. The question is just how you play it in the matchup, because there have been a couple of times where we've deviated away from playing Zephrys on 2, specifically because of the situation Bankyugi ended up in the previous game, or previous series, I should say, against Glory, where the wild growth, in his opinion, just wasn't even the best play.
Yeah, it's strange. I think Zephrys, whether or not you take it for wild growth or play it on 2 even, depends on how the rest of your hand's curve shakes out. Like, if you have a good play on turn 3, turn 4, then you can very well just hold Zephrys as a panic button, which you often need against Tempo Mage. If they go super wide with Mana Giants, you might just need some type of brawl play.
But here it is for Bankyugi with, yeah, I mean, a couple of real options there for Surrender. Honestly, I do think it probably is Puzzle Box at this point,
Really?
just because it's the most powerful card. Yeah, I genuinely do. Like, I think Conjurer's Calling is very tempting and a close second, but I think Puzzle Box is probably the best card.
It's so early.
Wow.
I wanted Rare Image. I'm sorry.
Really?
Because he has Shanvala and One Maker for another spell. Maybe he gets to pop off with the 3rd spell off the top after this turn.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah. I was going to mention, sorry, so much has happened already,
Yes,
that I
go
found
ahead.
Bankyugi Seal Fate keep very interesting, because while it is a removal spell, this is by no means a deck that's centered on Galakron. You don't even play that many invokes. So getting 1 invoke is by no means a guarantee that you get up to tier 2 Galakron.
So interesting though already. Like, the coin being used here is a pretty big deal for Bankyugi. Because even if he wasn't looking at Zephrys on 2, he could very possibly be looking at Coin Zephrys, Shadow Step Zephrys, Edwin coming down in the next couple of turns, which obviously no longer is a possibility. But, I mean, the possibilities are just absolutely limitless with Zephrys plus Shadow Step in your hand. This is the dream for Bankyugi.
That's pretty wild. And that's why the Coin Seal Fate was pretty surprising to me there as well. He's obviously trying to prevent a big clamp session from Surrender, but use of the coin means that Miscreant is tough to play this turn, and you don't necessarily want to corner yourself into having to play Zephrys.
Pretty crazy outcome though for Bankyugi with generating the Kobold Lackey into the Brain Freeze, kill off the big minion. It's another turn where Zephrys isn't being played, but you just don't really care that much, to be perfectly honest. Even if it was like Lawkeeper Polkel on the next turn, even though he's then going 9 mana, 7 mana, 6 mana draws, he has everything he needs to do with his hand already in the hand. I think that would just be a strong play next turn.
Many options.
Sure, this Zephrys just gives him plays leading up to the Alexstrasza, but it's a big deal that we've missed the window for Zephrys to give ramp, so
yeah,
I'm definitely not all in on Polkel the next turn. The big deal is that he's cleared Shanvala, which has ruined Surrender's game plan and really made it so that Mirror Image seems like a silly pick at this point.
Yeah, who could have told that at the time, Aegir, not being results-oriented at all? I knew the Kobold Lackey was going to come, I just didn't say it at the time. Jokes aside, obviously, the Mirror Image is far from useless at this point. With Cobot Spellkin next turn, quad 1-mana spell into Cyclone, this is still perfectly reasonable for Surrender. He doesn't know quite how devastating of a hand he's facing down, but he has still got stuff to do for the next few turns.
Yes, indeed. Spellkin is a lifesaver of a draw. Okay. We're charging up and we're going in next turn.
Indeed. I think I like the idea of triple trade into the Miscreant here, just to play around like Shadow Step or Witchy Lackey.
Okay, Witchy I'll hear the argument for, but I hate playing around things that are specific cards in Highlander deck.
That's fair. That's fair. Maybe I'm being overly cautious here. It's 4 damage to face, which is not
But
insignificant.
look at this. Jandis Step? I guess this is not a very pretty board to play Jandis into. Tons of one attack things.
So what's the alternative? Zephrys here isn't great, right? Like Lightning
It could
Storm
be
is what
Jandis
we're
and
looking
hold
at?
this step.
Yeah. Surprisingly awkward. Can you set up Soul Cleave?
Don't think so.
Yeah, not the
So
cleanest.
if you do go Lightning Storm, it's not all that bad because there's potential Pull Kelp the next turn, but you miss out Jandis for a while. I'm okay with just Jandis, honestly. And then you can evaluate based on the board state whether you feel you need to Shadow Step to Jandis.
Yeah.
Oh, I did
Wow.
not expect this. It's Dagger? I think Bankyugi has assumed a very
Interesting.
defensive posture for this game. And, you know, to be fair, when we were testing this matchup as the Highlander Rogue, I think that they generally tried to go for more aggressive plays. I don't know which one is how you're meant to win the matchup, but
Yeah, because this is a
getting
really
the
weird
secret
one.
down is a big deal.
Yeah, the plagiarize is absolutely massive. Like, obviously, just it being a secret at all is a big deal because it threatens plagiarize. But Bankyugi, I think, can make a pretty strong read on there being some kind of a swing turn coming up. So at the very least, this buys him a turn of weak play from Surrender to then set up for Polkel into the... I was going to say Polkel into Galakrond off the top, but of course you're drawing Dragon Queen Alexstrasza first. I'm not sure what he does with the turn he's bought himself, but it does mean that Surrender cannot go in quite yet.
Maybe he's just trying to buy himself a better Jandis. This allows for Jandis plus Titanic Lackey, so you can somewhat protect the illusion minion, and sometimes Surrender doesn't even have a minion that he wants to play this turn. I'll tell you, it was definitely not a play that I would have seen from Bankyugi, but it's achieved the primary goal of messing with Surrender's pop-up.
I mean, this is the thing, right? When you go a bit deeper, you have to start questioning, it's a cool play. Is it necessarily better than making a big Jandis or having a Zephrys clear turn? That's when things get a bit more complicated, but it's definitely not a terrible way to go about things. And he's bought himself, like you said, the one necessary turn to still have a lot of powerful plays here.
We're also entering very scary Raz territory, 2 lab partners on the board, but I think Bankyugi has a pretty strong read that Surrender is gearing up for a big turn. If he wanted to play around Plagiarize, then giving a single Raz might not have been that bad compared to lab partner ping.
Sure.
Or even just second Cobalt's Falcon.
The main thing here really for Bankyugi is the fact that he's taken this defensive stance, and as long as he doesn't lose the board here, he is never, ever, ever running out of value with Lawkeeper into a whole bunch of stuff. He just needs to survive against these couple of turns from Surrender, because this is a very powerful pop-off turn.
And it's massive that the Tome of Intellect generated Arcane Missiles. I was going to say, the one scary thing about devolving is sometimes you enlarge the Jandis by devolving it, but this gives him a good shot of clearing the Jandis. I don't even want to spend the mana on pinging anymore.
Really?
Oh, interesting. Alright, so I guess the only downside is you don't get to play that many spells post-Cyclone, but with the second Apprentice, you still have a way of cheapening the spells post-Cyclone.
Not bad at all, though. And Potion of Illusion is actually crazily powerful here, assuming that there's no board clear from Bankyugi, which there could clearly be, we can see.
I don't know the name of this 2/2, but that generates a spell damage minion after it dies, right?
It does, a spell damage 1/1.
Okay. Probably not worth devolving.
Probably not. It introduces some funky ideas with Bankyugi as to how he can play around with, like, Shadow Flame here, because now if he goes Zephrys, he can go Shadow Flame on the 2/2, which would then clear the board, right?
Yep, still can. Or even just all of these are much cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I was tunnel visioning on that, but just super clean way to wipe off the board. Get all the healing involved as well, and Shadow Step the Zephrys. This is what he's been leading up to the entire time, and I absolutely agree. He's taken this defensive stance. This is probably going to be used on healing now, you'd have to imagine, to play around any burn spells that were generated.
Agree. Bond of Power, potentially really big here if he hits Apprentice Cyclone or Mana Giant, but they're not available. I think he'd settle for, I was going to say, Worm Reaver, gets him wide on board again.
Yeah. It's a...
Alnos.
It's a bit of a deviation to not go for Potion of Illusion, and you're definitely sad about it, but I agree. Like, you want to be putting forward big threats at this point, even if it means you're walking into a Zephrys clear.
So you know by this point they have another Zephrys in hand, so it definitely feels like it's worth it to remove the spell damage here and the potential second spell damage from the Death Battle. Up. Perfect outcome.
This is obviously fine, though. Bankyugi has a couple of ways to go about this in terms of trying to take the clear. Like, there's if there's nothing better, obviously just 8 mana Twisting Nether, although I'm sure there's some nicer ways you can make this work.
Yeah, he can fish for spell damage again, and then go for another Consecration type play. These are not great minions, though. Probably just take Reservoir as the cheapest.
I agree. Archmage plus Zephrys, 2 mana. There's not really much you can do with that.
I wonder.
If we're just going for a full clear line, like the Reservoir, Zephrys, Consecration, Eviscerate, or probably a different order to make sure Zephrys gives you Consecrate, does the job. Rather Holy Nova at this point.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that just in case. You never know.
Wait, I'm not sure what... Now the Consecrate is a little bit short of dealing with the Wormweaver itself.
Yes, so he's just going to have to leave that there. Okay.
Job done.
Yeah, I was surprised by the Dalaran Mage plus 1 Thief. I thought it was going to be Mana Reservoir and Eviscerate instead for the full clear.
Me too. I guess the thinking here being that he holds that for an extra clear if that's necessary and says that this is probably enough. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that.
What to do? What to do?
And this has kind of been the case with Bankyugi, is I feel like he's going back and forth between lines that I think are actually like very, very smart that most players would not have seen, and another play that I feel like I don't quite disagree with. Like, he's going very much above and beyond, and then kind of a baseline level back and forth. It's weird.
Strange, because it definitely felt like Bankyugi was the defender in this position, and he really doesn't want to take any more damage than he absolutely has to. For Surrender, I'm liking the idea of, even though it seems like a major overcommittal of resources, just Blizzard Arcane Breath and push face so he can make room for Evocation.
What to do?
Ah, interesting. Okay, I mean, obviously I was just looking at Flame Strike as kind of the obvious play there. But I like your thinking behind that, actually.
So he is going to go for the Blizzard and doesn't end up committing the Arcane Breath because he does run some dragons, but I don't know, I feel like the Evocation is all locked up for next turn.
Knowledge is what I provide.
Wait, Bankyugi is bridging the gap to Puzzle Box with the Lore Keeper Polk out, but of course, now that it's Alexstrasza at the top, it is not necessarily box next turn. Oh boy.
Oh, Mana Giant off the top. I think we're definitely looking at an Evocation now. He knows that that is not plagiarized, right? So he doesn't have any fear of giving his opponent a whole bunch of spells. We're looking for that Conjurer's Calling in particular. Doesn't find it, but a pretty respectable outcome nonetheless.
Yes, indeed. So, he can finish the side quest this turn, which is a very big deal. Another Mana Giant! Hello! Apprentice
Apprentice
this is
as well?
kind of illegal.
Oh my god. Whoa, wait, he should play Elemental Allies first, right?
Is he playing it?
Oh, if he's not playing,
It might
okay,
just
sorry.
be Blizzard, right?
Okay, fair enough.
Because he finishes side quest if you go Blizzard. But there was also merit to your line with the other spells in set, Polymorph, Elemental, and Brain Freeze.
Right,
That's
exactly.
probably
That's
just better. Yeah.
yeah. That's what I was looking at in the end.
Well, it's a good deviation from Surrender after having made the mistake to not
Sure.
play Blizzard and be like, my mistake there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, not
this is quite clearly not optimal, but I think still the correct deviation to just get it down at all here.
Here we are. Hit the box.
What does he get? He has a 50% chance if he goes for Galakrond here to hit Flick, right?
True.
And a 50% to hit Kronks. Kronks is a disaster, right? Like, it just doesn't do enough here.
Yep. I don't know.
So-
I think greater than 50% of boxes can deal with this board.
Okay, let's go. Let's see what happens.
I'm very possibly just wrong here. I don't know if box is 50% or not, but I don't think even the Hearthstone devs would know whether box is 50% or higher to get rid of this board. But oh no, his own Blade Storm wrecks
Yep,
board
this
potential.
is not looking great so far. Bankyugi needs something more impressive, and these are not the cards quite yet. That is a dragon in hand. Still not enough, though.
Whew, Surrender ends up with lethal on board.
Oh man, what a weird game, Gia. Like, obviously at the end there, Surrender got kind of fortunate to get the extra giant there. I think he played that very well towards the end, aside from, of course, the one mistake with the elemental allies that didn't end up mattering. But for Bankyugi, that in particular for me was such an interesting game because some things I think he approached so well with the idea of going for setting up the plagiarize. I thought was very, very smart to buy himself an extra turn, set up these powerful plays in response. His use of Zephrys was weird, though, like the turn where he didn't kill off a 3-3 in the Wormweaver, especially when he was at 14. His opponent has a hand of randomly generated spells. It's very possible that one of them is just Pyroblast, which I believe he left himself dead to with an attack and ping on the following turn. And obviously, that Zephrys sitting in his hand for all those turns, you have to start considering that at some point the Zephrys was worth throwing down earlier with the Shadow Step as well. So many decisions there that could have been changed about, and some of them I thought were absolutely inspired from Bankyugi, but I'm sure he'll be looking back to try and find any avenue to victory.
Yep, he will indeed, but for now he has to focus on turning things around because he has to reverse sweep Surrender's own Rogue to have a shot of staying in the upper bracket at least. The good news for Bankyugi is that even if he does fall down here, he will end up in the elimination bracket and potentially face either Alan or Glory.
Right, which, you don't want to be in as Bankyugi. He was saying to me a little bit earlier that his goal for this season was to not get relegated. That's where he'd set his standards at because, again, he has not been a fixture of top-level competitive Hearthstone for a very long time. Thailand is definitely a country that is still on the up and up in terms of APAC representation. Bankyugi trying to do his fellow countrymen proud back home. And so far, he's done a very, very good job getting to this point, playing a lot of very strong Hearthstone. I think is something he can be very proud of, even if it didn't quite come together yet. Still has a chance to 3-0 the Rogue on Surrender's side, but with the Druid still hanging about in his lineup, I'm not loving his chances of doing that.
Definitely agree with you there. Questing Edwin is definitely a backbreaker for Druid, even before they had the nerf to Guardian Animals, and it looks like we're gonna start with that exact matchup. However, Bankyugi's opening hand is pretty good indeed.
That's another 2-keeper, at least, with the Overgrowth and the Guardian Animals. From Surrender, I think I like keeping everything but the Wand Thief, right? Like, this is a hand that to me just says cat on 1, tick, that's good, and then Jandis Shadow Step. It's not Edwin or Questing Adventurer, but it's a very powerful play.
This is super interesting because I looked at a very similar situation to this for Mullet Over last week, where Muzzy did keep Jandis Shadow Step on coin, but looking at how it played out, right, on average you would expect their Guardian Animals about turn 5. Even with Overgrowth, maybe they draw a piece of soft ramp before then. And so you're playing Jandis into their guardian animal's turn, which doesn't feel particularly powerful, even if you can follow up with the Jandis. I think I ultimately like Surrender's long-term decision of going for the even bigger high roll.
Oh, I don't know if I can agree, Gia.
Okay.
Like, maybe I'm overestimating how good Jandis is because, you know, to be fair, like it's very susceptible to the cleave effect. I appreciate that comes from the, you know, the Thresher as well. But unless you're hitting exactly a massive Edwin, I think that was good enough for me to just be going with on turn 4.
Not just Edwin, though. Even a questing earlier enough, I think it's unlikely for it to get cleared the turn it gets played, and then you build it up the turn after. And obviously it hasn't panned out super well with Surrender's hand, but at the very least, Hanar's Secret can also potentially disrupt a GA if you can land Counterspell, or even just any Mage Secret to make the Druid sweat a bit.
One thing I will say is that if there's a higher chance of you plus Surrender or me being correct, I am going to side with me on this one being probably correct. So Shadow Jeweler here, like I said, not bad at all as a follow-up. And I do like the fact actually that he didn't coin out Shadow Jeweler Hanar. I think the coin is more valuable with a secret passage in hand to try and find the Edwin or the questing.
Question is, does he play it this turn? Because the whole point of keeping coin is to pop off with 4 mana for Secret Passage and the Shadow Step, so if you potentially get Edwin off the top, you can play it then. So if that's the play next turn, Hanar is not necessarily chaining into Secret, so it could be Grand Mummy, or even a Secret before that instead. It's really tough.
Like, we can start doing some pretty powerful stuff in the next couple of turns. Getting down to Dirty Tricks is absolutely huge because you're absolutely expecting some spells to be coming down from your opponent. It almost 100% never dies here, aside from the most absurd of outcomes from your opponent. And so it's, I think, very safe, and you can start finding those powerful developing secrets that get you closer to your game plan.
True indeed. The play of Hanar this turn means that Surrender is not necessarily locked in to just all in on Find the Edwin off of the Secret Passage this turn. Hey, there's the card you wanted to keep.
That looks pretty powerful on the next turn, doesn't it?
And then it gets GA'd.
Indeed. Yeah, you kind of have to pick Repentance here. It's not bad at all, but it's not one of the ones you're really looking for. Like, you want Pressure Plate for the Guardian Animals, Netherwind
Trap.
Portal, Freezing Trap's a big one, yeah.
I would 100% take the Hunter Secret here because it's just the best against Guardian Animals, and also it's cheap that it still allows you to potentially pick up Counterspell with the coin next turn. Pretty good Repentance, all things considered.
Yeah, you definitely don't love to see that as Surrender. I mean, he picked it not anticipating that it would be especially good. It was really just to try and fill out the mana curve a bit more smoothly. But it does present him a pretty awkward situation now because the Freezing Trap, I think, is too good to pass up here. Like, I really want to go Coin Jan this step, but I just don't think you can pass up on the Freezing Trap to get rid of this.
Aha, we're not playing Coin Jandis! Sorry, I'm really petty about this, but
Sorry, did you
for
say
real, I
something?
think there's some value in taking the Mage Secret just to make Bankyugi sweat here. Also,
Yeah,
we
I
don't
mean,
want Plagiarize. He has a ton of those.
Nothing matters. Anyway, so I'm just going to let you take over, Gia. I don't know why I bother.
Okay.
Not that I'm petty
Cool,
about it either.
solo cast. They better pay me double for this.
Lol. So the thing is obviously that Netherwind Portal is a pretty good secret to have against Druid when you're expecting the Guardian Animals to come down in the next couple of turns. But is it worth using up the coin is really the big question.
Which I think it is, because he does still have Jandis next turn with Step, which is pretty good. I think he's already committed to Secret Passage later on instead of all-in Find Edwin game plan. And the benefit of Neverwind Portal is beyond it bluffing Counterspell, of course. It's also just a good secret. It's not Ice Barrier, which does nothing when they try to test for Counterspell. Huge
Bankyugi.
deal that the freezing denies Bankyugi the draw as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's missing quite a lot of information here. There's obviously Mirror Entity he has to be afraid of in terms of just playing the Twilight Runner. Overflow is the most obvious play on this turn. It's kind of like the strongest thing he can do. But then he's obviously running into card draw issues. If he gets the second Twilight Runner off the Guardian Animals, he's in trouble.
And he absolutely made Bankyugi sweat with the Mage Secret. Wild Growth here for Bankyugi. He's obviously just trying to make sure his Guardian Animals can go off the next turn, but it just works out awkward no matter which way you look at it, because if you proc the counterspell, they can still just potentially replay a counterspell next turn.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the main thing is that he had to play some spell there. It didn't it did matter, but the turn had to involve at least one spell, because counterspell Guardian Animals on the following turn is just game over.
To be fair though, now that the Wild Growth has gone off, if there is a CS, he can test with
So
Crystal Power
many
first and then go for
options.
GA. But is Surrender gonna take another turn of messing with Bankyugi, or is it finally time to go wide? Like, Jandice now looks really good because you can force Bankyugi to pick between clearing Jandice minions or the Hanar, and both of these put you in a great spot.
Yeah, that's true. You do know that it's like basically 100% Guardian Animals now, because it's the only card they would have kept but not played at this point, in which case Freezing Trap is very good. You have a chance to hit, obviously, Pressure Plate, which could just lock out the game if you get that, as well as that essentially counterspells the Guardian Animal.
He's holding the step as well, which is pretty interesting to me. Because the Thresher ends up really clean on Jandice, and also you don't have the Jandice in hand.
Yeah, this is devastating for Surrender in terms of his game plan. The board almost entirely wiped up, not even that much damage dealt. Now we need to start finding the big boy cards. Edwin, Questing, they have to be found right now.
And he has quite a lot of mana to work with, so Vendetta... I don't mind starting with one Thief, and then you can, you know, Shadow Step, and then Passage.
So do you think this is going to end up being a secret passage turn then, to try and find the Edwin?
Potentially. Yeah, these spells are not that great. But then again, you can just isolate this Twilight Runner again with the Freezing Trap. If you do that though, all you're developing is the one Grand Mummy.
Or the Netherwind, right? Like,
True, true. Oh, it's so close.
you could take one last turn. Like, I mean, the main thing for me isn't that I want to get the pressure of Netherwind down. I might even just go Freezing Trap Dirty Tricks, just to try and draw through to some more impactful cards, because you really, really, really want to find the Questing and Edwin. I like this a lot.
I was also thinking maybe commit a Shadow Step on the one Thief as well, just to make sure you have a good Shadow Step target for the turn when you've potentially gotten your Edwin. But to be fair, it's pretty difficult for Bankyugi to even clear a minion with that Freezing Trap developed.
I do like the idea of attacking here. You know, if it is another Freezing Trap, Ysera is just completely killed if that is Freezing Trap back to your hand, because you cannot innovate up to 11 mana. And so it's just a bigger development onto the board by attacking through.
Okay, 17 cards left in the deck. How are you liking the chances of digging for Edwin here? Definitely attack with the one Thief and step it first.
Yeah, maybe hit Cram Session, Arcane Intellect. Those are all okay to try and dig through to it as well. Interesting. I wasn't looking at that one.
Combustion sometimes lets you deal with Twilight Runners. I don't know, those are all not particularly good, huh? Okay, he's all in.
Edwin here is
Staring at the deck tracker.
just game winning, praying that he can find it here.
Another passage. He can prep it too.
Okay.
Dragonheart. Is there enough time?
Oh, he's just going right now. He's going to have to be very quick here.
Yeah, I mean, this also means that if you get Questing, you have mana left to play other things with it, but did he have the time to finish the turn? So many discovers!
That's the good one,
Yeah,
probably.
I don't think that's the legendary he wanted, but
Whatever.
okay.
No,
To be fair,
that's good.
It
It's
gets
playable.
to be played this turn. Okay, I'll hear the argument.
Perfectly reasonable turn there for Surrender. He got it all in at the last minute. That's what he fell victim to last time in terms of not having enough time to play his hand. So obviously fantastic to get it all in on this turn. Not necessarily going to be enough because Bankyugi does have some pretty disgustingly powerful plays at his disposal, but it's a great start.
Yes, indeed. Gidra Overflow is where my head is at for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking you go like Forest Warden Omu Burst?
True. Yeah,
Right.
that also just gives him more hand space.
Yeah, hero
Plagiarize is
power.
a little bit scary.
I think he actually knows that that's not plagiarized, right? Because he played a card and it was the secret was played last turn. So he knows
Correct,
it to be
correct.
dirty tricks.
Good spot. Nice too. He gets to value trade down the questing with his Isera and then go for its biggest Gidra. Right.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating for Surrender. He had all the cards in the world this game, but nothing to do with them. He didn't find the actual punch to go along with this deck.
One dragon. Honestly, that's more than enough. Look at the board development from Bankyugi with the Gidra alone and now the Anubisas.
Yeah, you'd probably rather too little than too much and have all your cores destroyed. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Either way, I think you're just winning this game pretty much every time.
Oh, Deep Freeze? Is that really where we're at?
Deep freeze, and then you're just dead to survival of the fittest anyway?
Yup. But don't know what the other cards do. Pray the fittest is in the bottom cards.
10, 17, 29. It's literally exact lethal, I think, with survival of the fittest. I suppose one over with the lightning bloom. But it does mean that Bankyugi is going to be able to get his first win on the board with the Druid. And he gets it, in my opinion, over the worst matchup up against the Rogue.
For real. That's a very, very big deal. To be fair, Surrender also took an unfavorable at the beginning. So not to say that these types of outcomes are possible. I still just want to discuss whether the mulligan was right or not. Like, watching the pan out of that game, do you feel like early Jandis into step Jandis gets there against GA?
Well, I mean, you know, if your opponent has that kind of a hand where they go Overgrowth into Ramp Guardian Animals, that probably is going to beat you most of the time. If you could see your opponent's hand there, then I appreciate that you might throw it away. But you have to play the averages here. Guardian Animals is a turn later in coming down a lot of the time. If they don't hit exactly Overgrowth, you really do feel that as the Druid. And I think in that particular game, the only thing that stopped him from going for the coin Jandis step was because he had such strong plays with the Hanar in terms of disrupting from his opponent's Guardian Animals. I'm still very willing to admit that Surrender is more likely to be correct than I am, but I am not personally swayed by the idea of mulligan away Jandis plus step. I just think that's so strong most of the time.
Completely fair. I mean, we're seeing great players like Muzzy keep that combination in the same spot against Druid. It's just pretty cool that even though we're so deep into the meta, it's still a lot to be discussed here. I personally still like going for questing Edwin instead, or even Hanar and trying to disrupt for as long as possible. But we will, see how other players have an opinion on that matchup. I hope we get to see a bit more Druid in the future, even though it has been nerfed. For now, though, it feels like either of the remaining matchups could go very, very long because it's Highlander Rogue and Control Priest for Bankyugi.
Yeah, the Secret Rogue from Surrender can obviously be a very, very fast deck or a very slow deck, depending on how it's played, and also depending on how it's built, actually. It's worth mentioning that Surrender has he has the Secret Rogue that I believe Casey and Bunny Hopper were piloting last week in Europe Grandmasters with Underbelly Fences thrown in there, obviously in addition to the Dragon's Horde and all the usual package. It's just a little bit more all-in on the idea of going for the Burgle side of things with the Dragon's Horde, the Vendetta, and all of that stuff thrown in there as well. It's an interesting way to build the deck, and it definitely takes some hits because of the fact that you're losing a preparation in order for a bit more tempo swing. But I don't hate the idea at all, because for me, the real thing that Dragon's Horde did wrong is it was just another card in your hand that didn't give you any immediate tempo. But with Vendetta and the Underbelly Fence as well, I think it's very possible that you regain enough tempo afterwards to make it worth it.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially in Surrender's lineup. If he was, planning on banning Mage even as a secondary ban, I think that the rogue list without Cult Neophyte becomes significantly better. I think Cult Neophyte is mainly in there to mess with Mage turns and, in some cases with Druid and potentially Priest, but the Underbelly fences give you a lot more board presence against the likes of Demon Hunter, etc. Looks like the players are just taking a quick break though. I would imagine the tension is really, really high if we're seeing even from Surrender slip-ups in terms of trying to get the whole turn done.
Yeah, exactly. A Surrender, a player who has been to World Championships famously 17 times in his lifetime. Very impressively indeed. Obviously, cheat there. But, he has just been one of the most storied players here overall in his time throughout Grandmasters and, of course, in HCT beforehand. What a win it would be for Bankyugi if he can turn things around and go through to the semi-finals. Like I was saying as we introduced him at the start of the day, he's definitely quickly become one of my favorite players to talk to, one of my favorite players to watch as well, because he's not afraid to go with the slightly more experimental side of deck building in Hearthstone, as some of the players are a little bit more cautious, and also just very approachable, very, very friendly, and a good player to talk to get a little bit more idea about his strategy behind the decks.
He is incredibly approachable, and he will definitely have a lot of practice groups to show for it because I feel like people underestimate the power of just networking in Hearthstone as well.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you come from a place where there are not that many top-level Hearthstone players, you do have to find other people to practice with eventually. But we are now in the game itself, and this is Highlander Rogue once again versus Surrender Secret.
Yep, like I say, Gia, the only reason I'm not world champion 4 times over is because I'm just a truly despicable person that no one wants to hang out with. That's the only thing holding me back.
You're the guy that messages GMs during GM between games.
No comment.
You have Tyler in your DMs. You're not allowed to say you don't have friends.
All right. One thing I will say, maybe losing a friend here. What is Bankyugi thinking? Dragon's Horde kept in the mulligan with this Highlander Rogue deck? That feels pretty surprising to me.
It's spicy. The one thing I can think of as a reason for keeping this is Bankyugi does really like his Underbelly fences on curve. So that's an activator for that alongside the Vendetta in his deck. It's a cheap card if you're looking to get an Edwin early on, but I will admit it's baffling.
Yeah, I think
there's the fence though.
yeah. I mean, obviously it pays off for him. Surrender, I think it makes a little bit more sense because he's running obviously 2 fences, 2 Vendettas in his deck, and he's quite clearly with the backstab and that being kept. Not necessarily taking a defensive game plan, but appreciating that he's going to need to fight for tempo aggressively in the early game.
Oh my gosh, what do you take here? Probably Mashifin, but he has 2 3-cost cards. They're not cards you necessarily want to play on curve, but okay.
I was going to say, I like Gidra. Like, imagine if you just go Gidra Secret on 5. That's a strong play, right?
That's fair. I was thinking there aren't that many big spells against Rogue, but I think I underestimated the utility of Gidra just play a guy, clear 2 lackeys. That's super valuable in this matchup.
True.
Where Rogue doesn't want to spend their resources on small minions. That for Bankyugi's case, if you go wide, then Zephrys Savage Roar is always a threat.
Right, exactly, yeah. You do need to be afraid of that, but Bankyugi, funnily enough, agreeing with us here and saying, you know what, Speaker Gidra sounds great. I want my own one. By picking the Madame Lazul to try and fight back against that. Underbelly Fence is a very scary prospect because your opponent kept 2 cards, one of which was the Dragon's Horde, which I don't think you'd have a strong read necessarily on it being Vendetta in hand, but that would definitely be pretty high up my list of expectations of what that kept card is.
That's fair. And also, just saving your rush minion has a lot of utility for especially the Highlander Rogue, which doesn't really have answers on demand. So I really don't hate the idea of just develop the ambush here. The only downside of not playing Underbelly is that you are unlikely to go with Lazul the next turn. turn, lest you give up the underbelly
How much is
activation.
this worth to you?
Yeah, that's the problem, because I think with the way this hand shapes out, if we look at it holistically, is coin Lillian doesn't sound very powerful to me. I think you'd much rather save it for a coin Togwaggle turn after you've hopefully found a lackey by that point.
But Surrender's hand is super awkward as well. It does look like it's gonna be Miscreant just to get the activations down. You definitely want lackeys to activate the other Miscreant.
Does mean that by playing the backstab, he no longer has a spell burst for Gidra, which is pretty devastating for the next turn.
I wanted my +0/+0.
It's the principle of the matter. It doesn't matter what it actually does.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like a just straight up pretty clean Lazul, right? You'd take any lackey here, I think, quite happily to activate your Togwaggle.
It's fair, but you also really want to get the dagger down to kill the Miscreant. Because I'd have to assume the underbelly fence is going into the Miscreant again, I was gonna say, because otherwise Surrender can just dagger it down. But Bankyugi is apparently treating this like a spy mistress and just going for a bunch of damage, which also has its merits.
Empowers what you seek.
Okay, fair enough. Pretty decent outcome there, obviously, for Surrender. And for Bankyugi, like, this comes with so many positives and negatives immediately. Like, he gets a much, much stronger tempo play right now. Like, Lillian was quite clearly the strongest thing he could do on that immediate turn. But it means Togwaggle is a whole extra turn away, which is kind of what he should be building up to here, in my opinion. It means that Madame Lazul is a little bit more awkward. Such an interesting, close game here.
To be fair to Bankyugi, he didn't have a lackey generator prior to the last turn, so he wouldn't necessarily think of Togwaggle as the main win con.
Well, my thinking was that if you go Madame Lazul, you're very likely to hit one, right? Just off of your opponent's hand in order to activate it with the Togwaggle.
Actual lackey or a
Yeah.
lackey generator. Well, Bankyugi has definitely fallen quite far behind now, taking a whole turn to respond.
And Surrender obviously has pretty powerful options here with going for attacking with the dagger. You're potentially taking 8 damage, which is a scary prospect indeed. But if it hits the pole Celt, then you can just witchy lackey that very happily.
I like that too. It's very strong. And with the witchy lackey played, he can test for ambush.
True.
Give me a quest.
Oh, that looks pretty premium to me.
Super clean. Vendetta away the ambusher and can fit in 1/2 as well.
I think I probably prefer Ethereal Lackey on this turn, actually, just for the chance of hitting Shadow Step or Prep or whatever. Interesting, okay. Surrender agrees with me.
Usually he does still get the questing above Eviscerate range, so maybe he would just have the extra health on 1 guaranteed here.
Looking scary now for Bankyugi. He has to tank 5 just to be able to clear this off, which is a big deal. Just being able to kill it off full stop is absolutely massive. But it's not looking much better for him in the next couple of turns. Goblin Lackey might be what you're looking for to just go with, like, Cult Neophyte in the next turn or two, or maybe Gidra even.
I mean, if you're taking a lackey, I figure it's to hold onto for
Right.
Togwaggle, but that's probably too slow by this point. Is it ever Gidra with your plagiarize the next turn?
Definitely consider the Gidra, for sure.
And you know that Surrender can Gidra you back.
Choose.
Right.
Bankyugi, no matter what he picks, will be playing reactively. I think the Togwaggle is the only chance he has at actually winning the game, but it's highly unlikely that he'll have the time to do so.
It's going to be close. To be fair, if this 5-5 ends up being killed by Bankyugi, there's... Oh, I was going to say there wasn't that much pressure on the other side of the board, but this Jandice is just another powerhouse play that keeps the pressure up, which is exactly what you want to do here against Bankyugi.
Super scary. Even if it weren't Jandice, just Gidra
So
plagiarize,
many
Oh,
and then
yeah.
the Wind Fury potentially sticks the next turn. Bankyugi has to take a turn off before he goes for Tog and Goblin, and then he plays the wand. It feels super slow, but now we have Jandice into the best possible 5-drop to seal the game, pretty much.
Yeah, I think Bankyugi knows this one is looking pretty grim. There's Zephrys in the deck. You always have to remember that. Just like Zephrys into Shadow Word Ruin is maybe what you're looking at right now.
Yep.
That's not obviously game winning because it doesn't even clear off a lot of the board, but there's the chance that Zephrys can pull him out.
That's right. Zephrys for stall is the best he's got. Try to survive until the Tog turn and getting the wand down. But that is not it.
Taunt, and then he leaves 15 damage on board, 2 extra needed for surrender, and I think Gidra can just get the job.
He's hoping for Kobold to try and snipe the Cloud Prince and maybe survive for another turn, but that's not the case here.
Nature speaks.
Yeah, and I think Bankyugi knows almost for sure that he's just dead on this turn. It would have to be literally no spells whatsoever in Surrender's hand for him to survive there. And I think he actually saw the Plagiarize as well as the Gidra, so he literally knows that he's dead on board here. As it does end up, Surrender is our player, Gio, the first player from Asia Pacific going through to the semi-finals on Sunday. Only 2 series away from having a 2-year-in-a-row representation at the World Championship. This man is just on another level.
2 years back-to-back and 3 years overall at World's appearance, possibly on Surrender's future. But we can't call it just yet because he was in a very similar spot last season and fell short at the final hurdle to Glory, who, by the way, is still kicking about in the lower bracket for this division. But certainly it feels like between Surrender's dominant start in the Swiss to his dominant run once again through the round robin and his lossless match score run to the semifinals, he seems like the favorite to take it all home.